This is the Soviet F-1 grenade, the grenade that is theoretically the most powerful in history. Whenever you look for information about it, you're going to see this. 200 meters of total range, that's impressive. This distance doesn't correspond to the traditional total spread, but rather to the maximum range at which the shrapnel is capable of causing incapacitating damage to soft targets. People who have heard about it are afraid of it, since in theory it's capable of clearing areas within a 50-meter radius or even beyond. But how real is all of this? Is this really the most powerful grenade ever created? Today we'll review its history. We will cite research and dig deep to uncover its secrets so we can determine if it really is the most powerful grenade in history, or what if it's actually the biggest military hoax of the 20th century. Get comfortable and welcome to Guns Club. The Soviet K isn't a very famous grenade on this side of the world, but it sure is in the former Soviet republics. It has been produced almost unchanged since 1941, and today it is still fighting in the most intense conflicts, like in Ukraine. The story of the Soviet K-Lemon begins in 1939. The new threat of war had started the efforts to modernize the entire Red Army. Grenades were one of those areas where the Soviet Union was practically stuck in World War I. In their warehouses, there were 16 different types of grenades. Most of them were from World War I, and none of them had acceptable quality. The only decent grenade in these warehouses was the Ruchnaya Granata Degtyaryeva 33. The rest were just old models with Soviet fuses. Also in 1939, our protagonist today, Colonel Fyodor Kramev. Just a year after graduating from the Artillery Academy of the Soviet Union, he was assigned the task of creating a new defensive grenade for the Soviet Army. Something that was easier to carry than the Ruchnaya Granata Degtyaryeva 33 and, of course, much safer. Kramev would look at a photo album of all the grenades used in World War I. He would notice that most of them were egg-shaped, and one in particular caught his attention much more. The French F-1 Kramev would later say in an interview that he did not copy the French F-1 grenade, since he only had a photo of it. But this is false, since the Soviet Union used these grenades and had hundreds of thousands of them in their warehouses with new fuses. So, most likely Kramev had these grenades at his disposal to develop a more modern version. Kramev took the F-1 and replaced its iron shell with a steel one, which was more fragmentable and more elegant, which also caused a freer explosion, further increasing the speed of the shrapnel. Kramev also mentioned in an interview that he made 10 prototype grenades, tested them, and only one of them failed. When he handed this report to his superior, he was forced to look for the grenade that didn't explode, since it was a secret project. And after bringing it, he had already sent the report to approve the mass production of the grenades without any kind of testing. Speed and shrapnel could have led to disaster, but the result was the opposite. A year later, millions of them would be in the hands of the entire Red Army. According to several quotes I found when the conflict began, the Soviets tested them in combat. They realized something amazing. The F-1 was really powerful, it had a 100% lethality radius at 10 meters, and it also had a fragmentation radius with potentially lethal shrapnel. From 10 up to 50 meters, that's too much. Compared to the Mark II, the numbers are even more surprising. Since this one had a lethal radius of 5 to 10 meters, and from 10 up to 27 meters it could spread potentially lethal shrapnel, the F-1 had almost twice the range, and according to reports, this initially caused many problems in combat. For example, a soldier with a good arm could throw it up to 45 meters away. That meant it didn't matter how far you threw it. It could potentially cause harm to the user and his comrades. This problem got even worse since the first fuses had about a 3-second delay. So sometimes the grenade could explode just before hitting the ground. Throwing it with full force would spread the shrapnel better by exploding in the air. The Americans understood these dangers well when they designed the Mark II. That's why it was made so the shrapnel could reach up to 27 meters. Its fuse had a 4 to 5 second delay. enough so the explosion won't reach the user even if they're not behind cover, and so that the grenade would have time to fall and settle. Kramep, when he designed the grenade, did his best, maximizing its power as much as possible, but without considering that too much range could harm users. To solve this, what they did was limit its use only to when the squad had decent cover, or later on. In the Cold War, was it used only from armored vehicles? Otherwise, it was a total risk for the user. Now, whenever you see information about this grenade, you'll notice that it's always emphasized that its total range was 200 meters. Really, this isn't surprising, since the lethality of a skirler lies in its size, because the bigger it is, the more energy it gets and the more damage it can cause. A grenade's maximum range is usually not very relevant, because even though most grenades can throw skirlers over 200 meters, most of these skirlers are so small and move so slowly that they could barely scratch you. And that's if any of them even hit you, since it's very unlikely to happen at such a distance. Most grenades have really crazy maximum ranges. Some Mark II variants can spread shrapnel over 250 meters. That's just above the F-1's maximum range. But what's interesting about the F-1 is that this distance corresponds to the spread of shrapnel, which can cause damage to soft targets, meaning it can penetrate the skin and harm the target. And no matter where you look it up, you'll always see that number of meters. But how real could this be? Well, all the data regarding the grenade's range given in this video apparently is anecdotal. The specific data, like the amount of shrapnel generated, its size, and the exact distances, were taken from a study presented in an article called "Preparing Grenades" from Weapons Magazine. An article made by someone named Leonidoc, which I literally searched for all over the internet, and it doesn't exist. It's the media. Only the citations of this article exist, like in Russian Wikipedia and some other sites. All the places that talk about this grenade give the data presented in this supposed study that was done on the grenade in 1999. So, technically, it's impossible to know if it's true that this grenade has a range of 200 meters. Because, well, I don't have one of these and they don't sell it at pharmacies. But there's hope. In the Russian Wikipedia, the article, "The Conditions of the Effectiveness Study" is cited, which was done on the grenade in Leonidoc's study. So technically, we can solve this mathematically and check if the data is correct. A detailed analysis of the total distance shows the fragments can cause damage at 200 meters. They are the large fragments, generally parts of the fuse and less frequently from the base of the grenade, since 60% of the casing turns into dust during the detonation, and only 40% of the casing turns into small fragments that are no longer dangerous, reportedly over 50 meters. So we only need to focus on the shrapnel caused by the fuse and the base of the grenade. Doing a calculation, that's approximately 10% of the shrapnel generated from the fuse. We can round that up to 12 to account for the less frequent fragments from the base of the grenade. In the report, we also see that it gives us the average number of fragments generated by each explosion. So we could calculate how many of these fragments are large fragments that could reach up to 200 meters. If we do that, we would get 36 large fragments produced by each grenade. If you stand at 200 meters, the probability of being hit by one of these fragments in an ideal situation with no obstructions would be 0.00654. In other words, the probability is almost zero. If that ever happened, it would be an extremely incredible event, like the time two projectiles collided in the air during World War I. That means the 200-meter range is completely false. That means Leonidov's study, which all official sources rely on, including Wikipedia, was wrong. It even goes further than that. According to all the articles I found, most of the fragments weigh between 1 and 2 grams. But that's not possible either. Because if you subtract the percentage of the grenade that doesn't generate shrapnel, you'd be left with the useful weight that turns into shrapnel. It's 216 grams if you divide that by the average weight of the shrapnel. We get 144 fragments per grenade, not 300. It says that the speed of each fragment is close to 700 meters per second. That's similar to the muzzle velocity of a projectile fired by an Avtomat Kalashnikova 47. If that's the case, the shrapnel shouldn't just reach 200 meters but much farther, up to 300 or even 500 meters, which is technically impossible. The study, on which all the Russian information is based, and therefore most sources in the West, was completely biased and apparently fabricated. The grenade's capabilities were exaggerated, with every aspect overstated to twice its actual performance. He doesn't really blame the media that spread Leonidov's article, since it was actually the only reliable article that had been written about the grenade until 2005. In that year, the Americans conducted a general study of almost all existing grenades, including the Soviet F-1. And in this one, we can see its real capabilities. We see that its real shrapnel dispersion range, potentially lethal, is 30 meters, almost like the Mark II. In this article, we see that the grenade couldn't be thrown 45 meters, as Leonidov's study said, but rather 30 meters. I also found many comments from people who served in the Soviet Union, giving testimonies that the grenade is really dangerous, up to 10 meters, partially corroborating the information from the American study. But then why do most sites use such falsified data as a reference? My theory is that even though this study from the United States existed, a study that seems more reliable, it arrived a little later. Which study do you find more reliable? The one conducted by the enemy country? The one created by Grenada, and that for decades has tried to underestimate all the military creations of that country? Or the one that's done precisely by the country that created Grenada? Certainly, it's understandable the decision made by those who chose to take Leonidov's information as true. The most incredible thing is that Grenada's overestimation goes even further. In the same Soviet stories about World War II, they talk about the supposedly exaggerated power of the F-1 in combat. It's incredible how a lie repeated 1,000 times can become the truth. Even to this day, people from the former Soviet republics and even from the West believe that this grenade can really take out anyone from 200 meters away. Ever wondered why automatic shotguns? Totally. In this video, you'll get the answer, so thank you very much for watching this video, and goodbye.